We begin the 8th chapter. The 8th chapter in one word is asur. We had that word previously, which means that which is forbidden. That's how we translate it. It really means tied, bound. Bound to extraneous negative forces. So, for example, for a Jew, forbidden foods that are not kosher, and that a Jewish person is not allowed to eat. It is asur, forbidden, more precisely, this is an important concept. Since Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, is God's language, as it were, that uses to create the world and to express himself in writing of the Torah. The language itself is not like any other language. English or Spanish, French, have whatever language you want to mention, is really a human language that people came together and decided that in English this is going to be called a pen, right? And it's arbitrary. This could be called a table, and the table that I have over here could be called a pen. It's got nothing to do with the words themselves. It's arbitrary, taken from a previous language, other language, but it's totally arbitrary. Hebrew language isn't that way because it's God's language. The word, the letters that make up the word in its entirety is a vital force of the thing that it is describing, or what it is. And therefore the word also means the thing. So the word asur means forbidden, we translate, but it means bound. Because something that's forbidden means it's bound to extraneous, to sitr acher, to negative forces, and therefore cannot be elevated. Because as we have learned, the whole purpose of creation is ultimately of a physical world, is to elevate it. Well, some things can't be elevated. Klipas noiga, the admixture of good and evil, is the intermediate level that has some aspects of good that can be elevated. But that which is forbidden can't. Now, let's bring this a step further. Imagine, unwittingly, you ate something that is forbidden to eat. And you actually ate it with the intent to serve God. So you ate something, let's say for breakfast, and you didn't realize it was not kosher, right? So, but your intent was totally to eat this thing, to have energy, so you could learn Tanya better. Or you could, go visit, someone who's sick and needs your help. Whatever mitzvah it is that, that you need the energy of your morning breakfast. And then you realize, oh my gosh, what I ate wasn't kosher. But you had intent to use the food thereof, not for your own pleasure, but to have strength to serve God, right? And in fact, you did serve God. You did study Tanya, and you did, pray with the energy thereof. Nonetheless, that food, since it is forbidden, which means, as we've said many times now, is bound. It is tied up to extraneous forces. It cannot be elevated, and it isn't elevated. It does not ascend to be clothed in the words of Torah that you learn or the prayer that you engage in. That the energy of that food should be like energy of that food that is clothed in your prayers and Torah study when it is permissible food. Why? Because it's held captive in sitra acher, in the negative force, in 3 unclean klipas, and the energy is not permitted to be elevated. Now you might say, yeah, but the person meant to it was unwittingly, so why should they be at fault? Well, let me give you a metaphor for that. Why should someone who mistakenly drank or ate something that's poisonous maybe die from it, or gets very sick from it at least, and if not even die? Why should that happen? I mean, they didn't mean to do it. Because it's irrelevant what you mean. The fact of what it is what it is. Poison is poison. And it kills, or at least can do harm. So the same thing over here. That which isn't kosher is poisonous. Sitiracher, negative force. It can't be elevated. Even if it's a rabbinic prohibition, not just a biblical law, right? That's a powerful idea. In other words, it's inherently so. It's not, just kind of, based on your feelings or based on intent. Poison has nothing to do with your feelings. I didn't mean it. Okay, didn't mean it, but. Therefore, if someone has an evil impulse for lusting for things that are forbidden, so the Alter Rebbe calls this a non-Jewish demon, because it's completely negative force. However, if you have an impulse for that which is permissible, right, like kosher food, things that are permitted, then that is called actually a Jewish demon. What's a demon? A demon means a negative force. So there's a non-Jewish demon, which is completely negative, like, things that are completely forbidden for a Jew. And then there's a Jewish demon, things that are permissible. But it's still a demon. Demon meaning it's a force, a divine force, an energy force. Just like, healthy food is an energy force for physical living. Poison is an energy force of interrupting healthy living. Both are energy forces. Both provide a field of energy, shall we say. One is good and one is not good. So the same thing over here. There's two energy forces. The non-Jewish demon, meaning things that are forbidden for the Jew, right? They're permissible for the non-Jew. And if you lust after that, so that's kind of the impulse you have in you, that you for relations that are forbidden, for food that's forbidden, and the like. But if your impulse, and again, it's a negative impulse, it's an evil impulse, is for things that are permissible, but it is for your own sake, for your own pleasure, not in order to serve God, but just for your own pleasure. So it's also an evil impulse, but it's called a Jewish demon, meaning it's an energy field. It is a vitality that we have for something that has a vitality that is klipa. Now, the difference is that this Jewish demons, this desire I have for this thing that is permissible, even though I'm not doing it for a higher purpose, whether it's eating, whether it's cohabitation with one's wife or whatever, it can be reverted to holiness. Why? Because since the food itself is permissible, or let's say the relations between husband and wife is permissible, right, in a time that's permissible. So even though it was eaten, let's say the food was eaten right now to just satisfy your bodily desire, it can still be elevated to holiness when a person will then return to the study of Torah and the service of God, right? Because it's not intrinsically negative. Now, that you have that energy and you're using it to study Tanya, so then it will be elevated, right? Now, even though it was reverted to holiness in Sitra Acher, this idea we mentioned in the previous chapter, and the Alter Rebbe continues with this idea. When we eat something, for example, and you didn't do it, the eating, in order to serve God, but for the pleasure thereof, which, by the way, let's be frank, we do that. I do that. Don't get all concerned and worried. What's going to be with me? You're right. We'll give the example of what it means, a righteous person. But in that moment, what happens is there's going to be a trace of negative vitality in that action of eating or anything else. It's permissible. And here that food in that moment became your flesh and blood. So obviously there's going to be some negative force over there. Let me give an example of this. And it needs a cleansing as a result. And that's what purgatory is a cleansing. Something we spoke about. What happens if you have an experience and that experience was traumatic? It's a negative force. You know what happens to that trauma? It's imbued in as a part of you. Afterwards, you went to therapy and worked it out. It's still a part of you. You're not going to be completely get rid of it, so to speak. It has its effect. It had its effect then. It continues to have its effect. Now, there might be good things that come out and so on, but that's as a consequence. But there is that effect. So the same thing is when we have the evil impulse, Jewish evil impulse, right? For Jews, food is definitely that evil impulse. Kosher, obviously, I'm talking about only kosher food. You see that there is that struggle that we have when it comes to food for Jewish people. Because it's an area that's permissible. There's other things that we're not allowed to engage in, so we stay away from it. But in the area that you can have, it becomes a struggle. So in that moment that you are having that pleasure, it's like in that moment, God forbid, there's a trauma, and I'm giving the trauma as an extreme example of, but it brings out the idea, just like poison brings out the idea. The trauma affects. You need cleansing afterwards to get beyond that trauma. You need therapy, let's say, or Torah therapy, or whatever it is. You need to. So the same thing is over here. If you ate the food in that moment with, the lustful desire, even though afterwards you do tshuva and you use that energy to study Torah, to learn Tanya now, nonetheless, there will be a trace of that food that you ate then, in that moment, in seeking and having the pleasure thereof, that you need a cleansing. And that's what purgatory is called. That's what Gehenna is called. To cleanse the body of its, and the soul of it, the pleasure that it had in that moment of the Jewish Yetzer Hara, the Jewish evil inclination, that negative force within. Now, that's, of course, if you derive no pleasure. If you don't derive pleasure, in other words, not seeking the pleasure, don't derive the pleasure, so then there's nothing to be cleansed from, right? This was Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Judah the Prince, who is the author of the Mishnah, who lived in the 2nd century. He was an extremely wealthy person. Yet, as he picked up his finger before his passing and said, I did not have a pinky's worth of pleasure or seeking pleasure from all of the wealth and all of the things I had in my life. Had it all, but it wasn't about the pleasure of having it all. Now that's a righteous person, and such a person then doesn't need cleansing, right? But anybody who hasn't reached that level of such purity and has mundane pleasures of things that are permissible, forget about things that are prohibited, that are tied down to and bound to extraneous forces, but things that are permissible, right? That's why all of us will have some kind of cleansing process to go through, except for the truly righteous individuals who can't pick up their pinky and say, I didn't have that amount of pleasure. I just want to make sure that we have understood what it means pleasure. They have pleasure in doing good. They had pleasure in studying Torah. They had pleasure in davening. They had pleasure in, nachas, as we call it. But from those things that are of klipa, like kosher food is an admixture of good and evil. It's not holy. So their pleasure was in holy things. So it's not like, they were like downtrodden, really, kind of nasty kind of people because, they had great pleasure, but from a connection to God, from doing a mitzvah, studying Torah, doing good for others. Now, they had that, a righteous person has that at all times. So we're not righteous, and we shouldn't get tzukrats from this. Tzukrats means aggravated by this. I'm gonna get some cleansing after I leave this world. Yeah, we are. Okay, that's a matter of fact. Okay, so get used to it, get over it. It's okay. The point, though, over here is the more we can, for us at least, a point that I'd like to bring out, is the more that we're engaged in doing good, Torah mitzvahs, the less, we need the pleasure of a mundane world that is animated by klipa. Because I'm getting pleasure from holy, spiritual things, from godly things. I'm getting the pleasure. And the greatest pleasure, in particular, what we need to derive is in studying Torah, what we're doing now. This should be the größte Vergnügen. This should be the greatest pleasure, that we're sitting here and we're learning. And that is giving me pleasure from the learning. The wisdom, yes. But more importantly, that it's through this, it's God's wisdom. And that I'm, able to connect to it, appreciate it, allow it to integrate and become a part of me. Then the Jewish demons and the un-Jewish, they'll be less a part of our desires, because we are, in the end, it's not about not having pleasure. The question is what you're having pleasure in. Pleasure in food, the truth is, we will have pleasure in food because, we're physical and we have a palate that, appreciates good food rather than not such good food. But the real litmus test will be that if you don't have the good food, okay, so you ate anyways, and it's all the same. And it's not, doesn't, what's the word? No big deal. So you wanted to eat this, and your wife gave you this, or you got that instead of this. No. That's where we need to be at least holding. The fact that I enjoy this and have more pleasure out of the sushi than of, a bowl of soup, I saw this might be a bowl of soup over the sushi. It's irrelevant. I'm just giving that as a, right? So, the fact that whatever it is, you're fine. Does your palate have more pleasure to this thing over that? Yeah. Okay. That's who we are. We're not Rabbeinu HaKadosh. We're not righteous people. We're going to be on such a level. But that's okay. We are who we are, and therefore, if we are engaged in having pleasure in a mitzvah, in the study of Torah, then we don't need those other pleasures so much. And if we don't have it, we're okay. But if Torah and mitzvahs isn't a pleasure, then of course watching a movie is going to be the pleasure you're seeking. And of course having a good meal will be the pleasure you're seeking. Of course, being with others and having fellowship that will be speaking about, not Torah, but maybe, as the old saying goes, what do people talk about? Simple people talk about other people. A higher level is to speak about, events. And even a higher level is to speak about ideas. As the old saying goes, and if all else fails, I'll speak about the weather, right? The point is, you don't need to talk about people. You can talk about ideas with people. Yeah, you can have fellowship and just, and having pleasure about, or having the pleasure of what the Torah that we learned today, and have the pleasure to share that with somebody else. Then the Jewish demons won't be so enticing. And the non-Jewish ones, for sure not. Because we have an energy in a good place. So firstly, folks, share with others. So I know now that. What do you know? What did we learn today? What did we learn today together that was something new that you didn't know before, or that you didn't know before, and now you know? What do you know? Serena says, I know now that food not kosher is energy force, non-Jewish demon impulse, and a Jewish demon is the energy force eating kosher food, not for a higher purpose. Excellent. Thank you, Rena. Excellent. And Freeman says, I know now that the more involved in Torah and mitzvahs, the more pleasure we will have in learning and growing, and then the less outside negative desires will mean anything to us, and the less we will desire and seek pleasure from that which we are sure. Excellent. Beautiful. Thank you. Usher asks a great question. In what category does politics fall into? Most likely not a holy thing. I enjoy politics, I must tell you. But just that's and it's probably somewhat of a Jewish demon. Very good, Usher. Yeah, but it's if it's politics that's going to lead to something, a positive action, so then it's not really politics, right? Then it's not politics. Then we need to take action in a certain area, and there's a political issue. So, but then it's not about politics, but it's about just discussing this party versus that party, this president versus that president, and so on. Again, just like I also enjoy kosher food, and I enjoy politics, I must admit. And it's not about we need to be aware of things, but we're talking about getting into the politics. That's actually an excellent question. So it's definitely not a holy endeavor for the most part, right? It is, think about it, an impulse that we have of pleasure that we have in discussion. Actually, tomorrow, you know what, actually, you know what? I should wait for tomorrow. We're going to deal with it at greater length. I just realized it's tomorrow's class. But thank you, excellent. Anna, I know now that a Jewish demon and a non-Jewish demon, you know that. Okay, the Jewish demon is connected with the holy or admissible things. Pleasure, no, Jewish demon is not pleasure in Torah. That's holy. It's not a demon. Demon means a negative force. And a non-Jewish demon is connected with non-holy and prohibited things. No. A Jewish demon means you have an impulse for things that are permissible. Food, kosher food, but still an impulse to have pleasure from it, right? So it's admissible, but so it's not pleasure in Torah. Pleasure in Torah is holy, right? John, I know now that the intent or purpose of Torah mitzvah should be directed towards service of God. Otherwise, it would serve desire, lust, and animal soul. Excellent. Mindy, I know that people have to eat. Yes. Bacha, I know that my intentions aren't enough. If I mistakenly break a mitzvah with good intentions, an example of giving non-kosher food to a Jew who is in need, I can't elevate the act of giving a need to holiness. The permissible kosher food that is given without the right intent can be elevated through with tshuva. Excellent. Our intents and pleasures in this world should be doing Torah and mitzvahs, study of Torah, connection to Hashem, and I acknowledge and accept that I am not a righteous person. All right. You didn't have to say that, Bacha, but that last part. But thank you. Irma, I know now that studying Torah and Mesa should be my greatest pleasure. Absolutely excellent, Eugenia. I know now that taking a pleasure in permissible things, not for a higher purpose, puts a stain on the soul. Excellent. Linda, I know now that my intent for eating does matter. Excellent. Tarek, the kosher is healthy and God's word always for our benefit. Excellent. Usher, we'll talk more about it tomorrow. Malka, I know now that demons are energy forces and demons can be Jewish or non-Jewish. It's always best to motivate by serving God. This won't purify the... Okay, excellent. I know. Okay, Hannah, I know now that there are two negative forces, non-Jewish negative forces and Jewish demons. The first cannot be elevated. The second can be reverted into holiness. It's permissible, even though done for one's own. Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. Linda, I know now, my intent matters when I eat food as to whether it's coming from a non-Jewish demon or impulse or Jewish demon impulse. Well, if it's intent doesn't matter, if it's not kosher, non-Jewish impulse, right? As poison, your intent doesn't matter, right? Just I'm not certain if I got that clear what you said. Benny, I learned that there are energies that are non-Jewish and Jewish. Excellent. So, Denise, when we take pleasure in eating on Shabbos, is that involved with demons? No, because it's a mitzvah. If you're doing it for fulfilling the mitzvah of having pleasure on Shabbos, so have the pleasure, and it's not a Jewish demon. It's a holy act. Israel, thinking of all those latkes I made last week. Yes. Very good. And if you made it for others, then that's good. Natalis, is the impulse referring to the Yetzer Hara? Yes. Excellent. Absolutely. Diana, I know now that there are Jewish demons and non-Jewish demons, but can't explain it in my own words. Okay. Thank you. Clem, I know now that I never could live without a good niggin a day. Okay. So eating non-kosher foods for a Jew, because they're forbidden for a Jew, is a non-Jewish demon. Correct. Very good, Diane. All right, folks. Amazing. Wow. I'm impressed. Very impressed. Got to keep it up. And for those who are having a challenge in writing something, get into it. Write, even if it may not be 100%, but no one said anything that was not, it was all worthy of expression. So I appreciate that, and hopefully you appreciate it because you're going to learn more that way. All right, folks. Sharing is caring. Please share the Alter Rebbe's teachings with others. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you for Chabad Tzurich and Kadeshim in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have a wonderful day.